feel like coming off mute for a half second and saying hi. We love to see all of your lovely faces and so many familiar ones. Good to see you.
Hello.
Hi, Quint. Nice to see you.
Hi, Shakira. Hi, Craig.
Hi. How's everybody?
Hi, Ray. Good to see you.
Hey, Ray. How you doing? Oh, hey, Kelly.
The Ingrams are in the house. Love it.
Hi, Selena.
Maya,
good afternoon, everybody.
Hey, Shaniqua. Good to see you. All right.
Afternoon.
Maria, do you want to give the spiel about recording and then I'll start that?
Yeah. Okay, so we will be recording this session. Just want to give you a heads up on that. And the recording will be publicly available on our YouTube channel. So if you are okay with being on camera during the recording, if not, we understand. So just kind of heads up that we're going to be recording this session.
Yeah, and specifically the recording will be recording whoever is speaking at the moment. So if at the end when we're doing Q&A, if you want to ask a question, but you don't want that to be part of the recording, you can kind of hold back. And at some point, we'll just check in with everybody. And if there's folks that have questions but don't want to be on the public part of the recording, we'll stop the recording and then we can ask some more questions after that. Okay? All right, so I'm going to go ahead and get that recording started. For folks who need it, there are captions available by clicking the 3 dots in your menu item. And then by going to captions, you can turn them on. And that way you can see what the captions for today are. So let me go ahead and hit record here.
Recording in progress.
Great. That always makes me startled, but I was prepared for it this time. So hello and welcome, everyone. My name is Maria Cornamola. I'm the Executive Director at Gathering Ground. I'm a white woman with medium-length brown hair that is down today. I'm wearing my favorite color today, an emerald green top with a V-neck and a patterned light green scarf and brown rimmed glasses. On behalf of my entire team, I want to welcome you to today's briefing for such a time as this, the nowness of reparations for Black people in New Jersey with Jean-Pierre Brutus and Assatta Mann. Today's briefing is made possible with the support of the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, the Stone Foundation of New Jersey, and the Grunning Foundation. If this is the first time you're joining us, we're delighted to have you and welcome. And we hope this is the first of many programs you participate in. If this is not the first time you're joining us, we're excited to have you back. Again, this session is being recorded and the recording will be available on YouTube. We ask that you reserve your questions for the last 20 minutes. We have a Q&A, a designated Q&A at the very end. If you have a question and you don't want to come on camera, we encourage you to either direct message myself or any of the Gathering Ground team members, and we'll ask the question on your behalf. Any discussion of and in New Jersey cannot begin without consideration of land and labor. Land and labor acknowledgements are tangible political admissions of the ongoing violence of the settler colonial state and our own implicit participation in it. We at Gathering Ground reside on unceded territory of the Lenni Lenape and acknowledge the global territories of indigenous peoples stolen through the act of colonization and repeated violence. We encourage you to acknowledge the indigenous people of the land you're currently residing on and or where you come from, and invite you to add it in the chat. You can learn about the original caretakers of the land in which you reside by looking it up in the link shared in the chat. I'm specifically currently residing on Muncie Lenape land. And so love to see where some folks are joining in from. If it's not necessarily Lenni Lenape, feel free to add it to the chat. We also must acknowledge that much of the wealth, infrastructure, and culture of this country, historically and through the present day, is only possible because of generations of enslaved peoples, primarily those of African descent. That enslavement continues today in the carceral systems and others. For us at Gathering Ground, we read these statements to make visible what has been invisible to many people, particularly people racialized as white. We acknowledge these historical truths of the theft of people and land, enslavement, forced migration, and forced labor, and that this is only a first step. We encourage everyone to support the organizations and people, most of whom are people of color, and some of you in this room today, who have carried the weight of advancing racial justice and social change. Before I turn it over to our special guest today, I just want to tell you a little bit about Gathering Ground. Gathering Ground creates irresistible, justice-centered gatherings that ignite dialogue, learning, action, and collaboration in solidarity with all people and in service to the creation of a fair and just world. We offer a variety of programs designed to address systemic issues and empower individuals to become agents of positive change. From community engagement initiatives to collaborative learning experience like our briefing today, each program is developed and crafted with the needs of our community in mind and with the overarching goal of cultivating a culture of equity and justice. I'm going to take advantage right now and tell you a little bit about exciting upcoming programming and hopefully get you excited that you'll register. We have a 4-part workshop series coming up with Dr. Franca Roybal Fernandez on decolonization. It's going to run from April through the second week of June. Session 1 is scheduled for April 17th, 2026. Registration link will be available soon. Anyone that is interested today in participating, we will add a Google form link to the chat. Please complete the form, and we will be sure to send you the registration link as soon as possible. I also just want to remind folks, we have an Elevating Equity reading and discussion group. I have some of our current participants in this room today. I'm excited to see you. We meet every 4 to 6 weeks. It's a meaningful and energizing space. We meet in the evenings, so it's more accessible for some folks. If you're interested in joining, please email myself or Casey. Our next date is April 9th at 6:30 p.m. And we're currently reading the Reparations Now report. So this conversation today will be a good segue into our reading group. And we're also kicking off March with our Civic in Solidarity, a community space to simply be together, connect, and be in harmony with one another. And lastly, on March 11th, our Communities in Conversation, a fast-paced virtual think tank for connecting with peers and exchanging ideas. All links will be in the chat, and so we hope you register for any or all of these, and we look forward to seeing you. I want to recognize the people who've been working on today's briefing, my fabulous team, all in green background. We have Casey O'Brien, our Director of Programming, Anaya Brown, our Communications Associate, Alyssa Prevost, who's not here with us today, but she's our Operations Associate, and our newest team member, if you haven't yet met her, Maria Espinal-Mena, who's our Community Engagement Coordinator, and who will be out in Camden tomorrow. If any of you are going to the Dominican celebrations, Maria will be out there meeting some of you, so we're excited to have her in community. And of course, our special guests, Assatta and Jean-Pierre. I want to thank you all for making this a priority in your busy day and your busy schedules, and we hope again that this is one of many programs that you join us for. Like many of you today, we deeply admire the work that the New Jersey Institute for Social Justice has been doing and are proud to be committed partners in helping to amplify their efforts. And we're so thrilled to have 2 members of the team with us today. Jean-Pierre Brutus is a senior counsel in the Economic Justice Program at the New Jersey Institute for Social Justice, where he leads the Institute's reparations advocacy. He previously worked at Legal Services New York City, representing tenants facing eviction, and holds a degree from Georgetown University and Northwestern University. And Assatta Mann is the community organizing manager at the New Jersey Institute for Social Justice. She previously worked at the League of Women Voters of New Jersey and has extensive experience organizing advocacy campaigns and electoral efforts across the state. She is a New Jersey native and a graduate of Rutgers University, Newark. You can find more about Assatta and Jean-Pierre and the Institute on their website, and the link will be in the chat. And now, without further ado, I will turn it over to our esteemed guests. So Jean-Pierre, I think you're kicking us off.
Yes, thank you so much, Maria. I appreciate it. Thanks for the kind introduction. And thank you to Casey and thank you to the Gathering Ground team. It's a pleasure to be here this afternoon. I want to thank you all for taking time out of your afternoon to join us this afternoon. I'm here with my colleague Assatta Mann. This is actually Assatta's anniversary of being at the Institute. So I just want to give a big shout out. It's really a pleasure to be Assatta's colleague. So I like to celebrate her and to shout her out for that. And yeah, we'll get into it. And hopefully you'll learn a little bit of something today about the work that we're doing at the Institute regarding reparations. And I look forward to the question and answer. I'm going to share my screen now. We've got a little presentation for you. I've got my slides. Asada's got her slides. And yeah, we'll get into it. So here we go. All right. And we're about to get started. All right, can you all see that? Wonderful. All right, so hopefully you're doing by now. The name of this presentation and the title of the report is For Such a Time as This, the Nowness for Reparations for Black People in New Jersey. And this report makes the case for reparations in New Jersey, and I'll go over some of what the purpose of this presentation. First, we're gonna go over New Jersey's history, slavery in New Jersey, Jim Crow and segregation in New Jersey, and the underlying rationale for why we've got these massive racial wealth disparity and other disparities in New Jersey. And then I'll discuss a little bit what reparations are and what that looks like, and then as well as some of the policies, recommendations in the report. And then my colleague Assatta will get into some of the stuff that we're doing post-report in terms of public education and advocacy and organizing. So just a little bit context for the creation and the development of the New Jersey Reparations Council. In 2019, November, the state legislature, led by Assemblywoman Shavonda Sumter and Senator Ronald Rice, introduced legislation that would establish a reparations task force in New Jersey. That bill was, in some ways, modeled on H.R. 40, which is a bill that was first introduced in 1989 or 1988 by Representative John Conyers, which was designed to study the issue of reparations at the national level. What you saw in 2019 was the beginning of a shift in strategy and reparations advocacy from organizing solely or primarily at the federal level to at the state and local level. New Jersey was one of the first, if not the first state to introduce this kind of legislation several months before California introduced theirs in February of 2020. As all of you and many of us, all of us lived through, in May of 2020, George Floyd was murdered by the police in Minneapolis, which led to the racial justice uprisings that summer. The state of California was able to take advantage of that zeitgeist and pass legislation in support of establishing a task force in California in the fall of 2020. Here in New Jersey, we could not even get the bill heard for a hearing, right? When Ryan Haygood, our president and CEO, and other leaders in the state met with legislative leadership, they would ask Ryan and other folks, like, why are you so focused on the term reparations? Why not use something else? Why not call it a racial wealth gap task force or a racial disparity task force? In part because they said if reparations made people feel uncomfortable, viscerally uncomfortable. And they also said, maybe why not call it a Black Lives Matter task force, right? Anything but reparations. And so at the Institute, we decided that we would call our campaign to establish this task force called Say the Word. All right, we wanted to normalize, socialize, destigmatize. We wanted to make reparations common sense and commonplace here in New Jersey. And so we didn't want to run away from the term. We wanted to lean into the term. Well, we continued to try to advocate with our Say the Word coalition. We had lobby days and met legislators. We had an increased number of folks in the legislature sign on as co-sponsors, and yet the bill did not move. The bill would not be heard for a hearing. So rather than wait, as we saw other states and cities across this country, including places like Atlanta and Detroit and Kansas City and Boston, New York State, now Maryland, all these other places pass bills that would establish task forces in their localities, in their jurisdictions, we decided that we would move forward and launch our own task force, which we called the New Jersey Reparations Council, with generous support from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. So in June of 2023, in Perth Amboy, and the reason why we chose Perth Amboy is that that was a major site for the trafficking of enslaved people here in New Jersey, we launched the New Jersey Reparations Council. which is made up of 55 scholars, experts, advocacy leaders in the state, community members, and it was co-chaired by historians Khalil Gibran Muhammad and Tajine Henderson. And these 55 folks were divided up into 9 separate committees, including history of slavery, public education and narrative, economic justice, environmental justice, segregation, democracy, public safety and justice. And so those are some of the committees. And each of these committees would host what we called a virtual public session over 2 years. And those public sessions were designed for each committee to sort of read out their work to date and then also receive input from their public about their views on reparations within those particular areas. Over those course of the 2 years, those committees took in public comment and incorporated that into their research and produced writings that were put together and made into this one report, which is both a combination of a harm report, which looks at the harms of slavery and its aftermath, including the harms of segregation, or what really folks should be calling apartheid here in New Jersey and in the US, and then also ongoing institutional racism after the ending of formal apartheid and Jim Crow interrogation here in New Jersey and the US. That report was released in June of 2023, which I said you saw at the beginning with the Sankofa bird. And I just want to highlight the Sankofa bird, the Sankofa symbol, because that sign, that symbolism reflects the idea of to go back and look to the past before moving forward to the past, to go back and get it. It comes from a Khan cosmology, we're current day Ghana. And the idea is that we understand as we take account this current moment and the travails and the fight that we are in this current moment really has antecedents in the past, and we can draw from the reservoir of those who came before us, the many folks who will go unnamed in history books, who organized, advocated for repair, but also for Black liberation, for racial justice. And we are one part of that process, of that timeline. And as the philosopher Olufemi Taiwo points out, we want to be good ancestors ourselves. We know that there are many generations of folks that will come after us. So the way the report is organized, there is an introduction written by our co-chairs, Khalil Gibran Muhammad and Tajine Henderson, and that gives an overview of the report, but also it contextualizes the history of organizing for reparations in this country and some examples globally. One of the key things that report does is explain how the report and how we think about reparations in the report through the council. And so I think for many folks, the first thing when they tend to think about reparations is they tend to think about reparations in one form only. And that's the dominant form that tends to be direct cash or what folks will call compensation. But in the report, we think about reparations as comprehensive reparations and as a process. And we take that from the international standard of reparations, and this takes 5 forms. But also the international standard comes as reflective of the way in which Black people have been organized for reparations in the U.S. more broadly. So the historian Robert D.G. Kelly and others have pointed out, particularly in his work Freedom Dreams, but in other places, that when you look at the ways in which Black people organize for reparations, it's always been expansive, comprehensive. And so, yes, you see here compensation, but the one I really want to focus on in terms of the forms of reparations that's key for this purpose and for the ways, the forms that our policies take is the first one, cessation and guarantee of non-repetition. One of the key things for any kind of reparative program is to ensure that the policies and the practices and the laws that are currently reproducing the harms of slavery, right? Reproducing racial harms, reproducing racial inequality, sustaining the racial wealth gap, sustaining the other racial disparities around maternal mortality or disproportionate amount of incarceration or killings by the police, that those practices, those policies, those laws end. And then you begin to think about building new kinds of policies, new kinds of practices, new kinds of structures. And so that's important when thinking about any kind of repair. The structural nature of it, the comprehensive nature of it, and also that it's a process, that no one policy, and we'll get to this later, is reparations. The reparations is actually a process, and it's constantly going back on itself to ask the people who've been harmed, where are they now? How do they feel, right? And so that's a key part of any kind of reparative process, is engaging the public, engaging those who've been harmed. And we take a harms-based approach in this report, and I'll get into that later as well. So also, as I said in the introduction, we go over the history of organizing reparations, including key folks like Callie House, who organized formerly enslaved people in the United States in places like Tennessee in the late 19th century, beginning of the 20th century. It was one of the largest social movements in the country. And the state, particularly the federal government, felt that it was so threatening that, just like with Marcus Garvey, they brought false charges against her for using the mail for fraud. And that was a way of undermining her social movement for pension for formerly enslaved people. You can read more about Callie House in the book My Face is Black, My Face is True by Mary Frances Berry. And then also you can read about Queen Mother Moore, the mother and the head of the modern reparations movement. The historian Ashley Farmer has a recent book about her. It's just new in the past few months, a new biography, the first full-length biography about Queen Mother Moore in the middle of the 20th century. All right. So as I said before, in terms of the context for how we're doing this work, you see a proliferation at the local, state, and national level, organizing for reparations, particularly around task forces. Evanston, Illinois, followed by Asheville, are from the first places to actually implement reparations at the municipal level. California is the first state. California is important because not only is the largest state in the country, but it is the fourth largest economy in the world. And it introduced, its report is encyclopedic, and I say that because it's 1,500 pages long. Because it's self-aware about its location as the largest state, it's not only a conversation about slavery and its harms in California, but also at the national level. And many other task forces around the country look to California as an example for how to engage in their task forces. This is just a preview. I'll skip this, but this is a trailer for the documentary about how Evanston went about and created their reparations work. It's called The Big Payback. You can watch it on PBS for free. It follows the work of Robin Ruth Simmons, who is now the executive director of First Repair. First Repair hosts an annual symposium in Evanston in December for reparations advocates. I have attended 4 of them, from the second to the 5th one, and each year that I go gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and it takes up more rooms. Because of the increased activity and commitment, Assatta and I went to the one in December, and you really see the kind of energy around the reparations movement in this country through the work that First Repair does and so many other movements. But First Repair tries to organize state and local leaders for reparations. And this is how the folks in Evanston went about and did that work. Now I'm back to the New Jersey Reparations Council. So, as I said before, part of the purpose of this report is to connect the past to the present, right? We want to draw a direct line to slavery in New Jersey to the current moment, to expose this history, to build this movement through the recommendations, and then to demand reparations. You know, we take very seriously history in this report. We cite historians and poets like Maya Angelou about the role of history and its impact on the present. And as such, we call New Jersey the slave state of the North. And what we mean by that is New Jersey was not just a society with enslaved people, but as historians have called it, a slave society. And that means that it was dependent upon enslaved labor for the building of its very infrastructure to build its economy. That's incredibly important because when we think of slavery, we think it's particularly in the way in which it's presented in New Jersey as being something that's on the margin, something that's being insignificant, something that was small, something that wasn't as harsh, something that wasn't as important. But in New Jersey, it was just as violent as any southern state. And you see that represented in the kinds of slave codes that New Jersey had, where it was just as punitive, just as demanding, just as restrictive as any slave code in the South, including slave codes that prevented not only Black people from owning property who were enslaved, but also from congregating at night after a certain time without the supervision of their master, subjecting them to corporal punishment and other forms of punishment for very minor kinds of infractions. Additionally, you get a sense of how big the population of enslaved people in New Jersey compared to other North states when you see that when the British took over the colony from the Dutch in 1664, they incentivized slavery by giving 150 acres of land to white settlers and then additional acres of land for each enslaved person that came with them. So by 1830, of the enslaved population in the North, 2/3 of them resided in New Jersey. New Jersey was the only state in the North to not support Abraham Lincoln in either of elections that he won. It was the only northern state to support the Federal Fugitive Slave Act of 1850. Also, in 1821, this is 36 years before Dred Scott's decision, in which the Supreme Court notoriously found in 1857 that Black people had no rights which a white person was bound to respect. The Supreme Court of New Jersey in 1821, in a case called Gibbons versus Morse, stated that when you saw a Black person in New Jersey your assumption should be that they were an enslaved person. And so the creation of policing in New Jersey was shaped around this idea so that police officers, sheriffs, and other watchmen assume that to see an enslaved person or see a Black person was to see an enslaved person, and that Black people who professed their freedom were either were lying, essentially, and they had to demonstrate their papers. So here you see a map, sort of a graphic description or display of the population in New Jersey, and you begin to see a decline. And this is sort of misleading because New Jersey in 1804 passes a law called the Gradual Abolition Act, which is sort of supposed to allow enslavers to free enslaved people, but really those folks became apprentices for life. They were enslaved in all but name. And what happened was, and when folks say, reparations are not possible in 2026, well, in 1806, from 1811, the state of New Jersey paid enslavers. I'll say that again. The state of New Jersey paid enslavers reparations. This was so costly that in 1 year, they paid almost a third of the state's budget to basically cover the cost of, quote unquote, freeing their enslaved people. So the state was providing enslavers the cost of the labor that they were losing by, quote unquote, freeing their enslaved. But in reality, they never freed enslaved people. They were still apprentices for life. They were enslaved for life. The state had to stop this practice because it was too costly. Enslavers were taking advantage of this program, and it reflected how much the state valued Black labor, how much reliant it was on enslaved labor. And so this is a kind of reflection of the dollars and cents of enslavement and really Black and white terms. Also, as I pointed out, thinking about the present moment where people are asked to show their papers, demonstrate their citizenship, often folks will look to the 1930s in Western Europe, right, to think about this kind of moment. And the U.S. has its own history of this kind of authoritarian kind of practice, particularly for people of color. As so many Black thinkers and other people of color have pointed out in the 1930s and 1940s, right, when you're looking at critiques of fascism, you don't need to look at colonialism as the antecedents for that, right? And here in New Jersey, right, as I pointed out, New Jersey would allow slave catchers, quote unquote, to come from the South into New Jersey to seek Black people who had emancipated themselves from slavery in the South, or even to kidnap free Black people. The Cannon Johnson Company is an example of this, but we use this example to show Black people organizing to push out slave catchers. So they're to push out folks who had come to try to kidnap Black people and bring them back down to the South. And there's an example of people organizing against that in a Black town called Timbuktu, named after a town in the African continent. Part of what I wanted to show the images in this report. I want to give a shout out to my colleagues on our communications team who really put these beautiful images together. And we wanted to show Black life who weren't directly under slavery, to show the beauty of it. And this is an example of that. So I want to give a shout out to Jake and Wendy Liz for helping to put that together. Now, one of the key things I just want you all to think about is, given the commitment of New Jersey to slavery, the depth of slavery in New Jersey, the way violence permeated every aspect of slavery in New Jersey, the way it shaped New Jersey's economy, its politics, right? You have universities like Princeton and Rutgers that benefited from slavery, its faith institutions, but slavery also shaped the health outcomes of enslaved people. It shaped also the over-policing of Black people. Also, it's New Jersey's democracy, which prevented Black people from participating in the democracy in full kinds of ways, eventually enshrining white supremacy by preventing Black people from being able to vote, even if they were free, right, after the enslavement. All of this laid the groundwork for the shift to Jim Crow and segregation in New Jersey. And what I want you all to think about is this is not a clean break. It's not just slavery and then move to this. It's a slight shift. And what you see as a key part of that is this violence that's permeating Jim Crow and segregation. The reason I use Jim Crow specifically because, yes, there were several unequal facilities here in New Jersey, including in leisure facilities like Atlantic facility at Atlantic City, like at beaches. And we start off with sort of the racial violence in this moment. This documented lynching of Mingo Willie Jack here in New Jersey in the 1870s. The Eagle Dustage Initiative has a memorial to him here in New Jersey. And then also, so what's underpinning the policies that reinforce segregation, residential segregation, and spatial segregation in New Jersey around the creation of housing discrimination. So this is an example of a racially restrictive covenant. Those were in deeds. What you see often in these deeds is that the exclusion of Black people and other non-white people in the deeds is next to things that are associated with devaluing the property. So there's an association of Blackness with devaluation. That Blackness is to devalue property, that to be associated with, to be near, to be proximate to Black people, to be proximate to Blackness is to be devalued, right, economically. And so you see this over and over again, these racially restrictive covenants. And then also you see the federal government's sanction and allow for redlining, right? This is the redlining map where the Homeowners Loan Corporation, the HOLC, creates these maps to reflect the idea that where you have red on the map, those are places where you do not provide for credit or investment, where people cannot purchase homes who are Black. They don't want it. Part of the investment risk associated with investment risk is mixing, quote unquote, mixing between white people and non-white people, particularly Black people. And so to sort of prevent that, you have a built into the policy with the real estate market, a set of policies designed to prevent that kind of activity. So you have red for this is a no-go, yellow for still a place that you should be hesitant about, and then the blue or the bluish green is okay. That's yes, you can. Those are predominantly overwhelmingly white spaces. And also as part of that discussion in our segregation section is a discussion about how segregation and sort of racialized policing and if affects health outcomes, exposure to environmental toxins, affects education outcomes, how you see segregation in New Jersey's hospitals, access to healthcare. You begin to see the groundwork for this over-policing in different parts of New Jersey. You begin to see how this affects people's education outcomes, right? On and on down the line. And what we do in the report, and that's key, is that we want to link together all these things connected to the structural nature. And we tell a story about MLK going to Maple Shade, New Jersey in 1951, in which he, on a after Sunday service, goes to a bar to get a drink with his friend Walter McCall. The bartender does not want to serve them because they are Black, so he takes out a gun and shoots it into the ceiling. King and his friend leave the bar, flee. They try to bring charges, but they can't get anyone to testify against the white bartender. They have to drop their civil rights case. Walter McCall called out King's first attempt at a civil rights action. This history is incredibly important in terms of individual stories, but this larger narrative, because it gives the context for so many of the stats that folks bring up around racial disparities. All too often, these disparities are brought up without any context, right? And sometimes it leads itself to this idea that there is some kind of inherent weakness, limitation, some kind of cultural deficit amongst Black people. And so without talking about the structural nature, right, the historic nature, the sedimentation of history, the accumulation of history that brings this about. So you see the wealth gap for individuals, life expectancy, this gap as well, median household income, percentage of people Black people disappointed shot by the police, right? All of these have historical antecedents. That gives the context for the current moment. And this also is being perpetuated by the state of New Jersey itself. So when you begin to see Black people migrate to New Jersey as part of the Great Migrations from 1910 to 1970, in the 1930s, the state of New Jersey begins to sort of write reports about the Black population. And in these reports, you see a gloss over slavery in New Jersey. It doesn't even really take into account. But when they even do talk about slavery in New Jersey, including historians of New Jersey in the early 20th century, the late 19th century, they dismiss slavery in New Jersey as being sort of a minor issue, not as violent in the South. New Jersey was actually a paragon or a prime example of the beneficence of enslavers, right? That they had this kind of noblesse oblige in some ways, that they took care of their enslaved people in a way that those in the South did not, right? This kind of caretaker mentality. When in actuality, as I said before, slavery in New Jersey was just as violent as anywhere in the South or anywhere in the United States or anywhere in the Americas, really. And this perpetuated this idea of New Jersey as being this halo of progressivism, when underlying it is this history of structural racism. Marion Thompson Wright is a key historian of slavery in New Jersey, and many modern historians are indebted to her work, her pioneering work about slavery in New Jersey. And so we wanted to make sure that we highlighted her importance. Okay, so after going through the harms, and we lay out the harms for these different racial regimes, slavery, Jim Crow segregation, contemporary racial, we also link those harms to recommendations. So we have close to 100 recommendations in the report in which we actually develop this idea of comprehensive reparations, right? That is based on a harms-based approach. And we link each of the recommendations back to the harms that we've identified in the report. This is an example of the interim readout in June of 2024. So this gives you sort of a little bit of an overview of some of the recommendations. And one of the first ones that we start with, the first recommendation in the whole report is under our democracy section, which is around the state level 14th Amendment. You know, we are in a moment now when folks are questioning the birthright citizenship aspect of the 14th Amendment. The historian Eric Foner calls this Reconstruction the second founding. The 13th, the 14th, the 15th Amendment create a new constitution, and people underestimate the power of those amendments and the power, particularly the 14th Amendment, to come up with quote unquote race conscious laws, right? We're in a moment now where people condemn the idea that you can come up with race conscious remedies to address structural racism. It's kind of absurd. The idea that you have to come up with race neutral or colorblind policies to address structural racism. And what we want to do is highlight that during Reconstruction, the legislature was intentional about designing an amendment that would empower the legislature to create race conscious remedies to address things like enslavement, to address things like the Black codes, right? And so we just want to make that particularly poignant and point that out in our report. And also, as pointed out earlier by Maria, about closing the amendment on the 13th Amendment around slavery for those who are incarcerated. We call for direct payments to close the racial wealth gap for the harm to slavery, as well as post-slavery harms. We also call for universal policies like baby bonds. We call for guaranteed income. We call for policies that address segregation, policies that address the maternal mortality cap in which Black women are disproportionately dying. We have policies that address public education, as I may have pointed this out. 56% of the population in New Jersey simply does not know that slavery happened here in the state. So now we are in the moment of shifting from having the report on the shelf to moving the report onto the streets, right? We want to make this report actionable. We want to turn it into something that people can organize and mobilize around. Now is the time to take these policies, these recommendations, and make them actionable. We want to teach the public. We want to do public education. We are making this report into something called a dynamic exhibit, or a website that folks can go to and engage in differently. We're also making animated videos, explainer videos, based on this report. There will be 7 in total. That will cover each section of the report so people can engage in that. That's one way, but we also want to engage relationally with folks, and my colleague Assatta will talk about that. That's just a brief overview of the work that we're doing, and I look forward to your questions after my colleague Assatta presents, but thank you so much.
Okay, great. Thanks so much, Jean-Pierre, for that awesome presentation. It's always a little scary to have to follow up after you. All right, got my slides up. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks again to Gathering Ground, Maria, Casey, the whole team for having Jean-Pierre and I on. It's always, a pleasure and honor really to be in the same space with you guys. And so I'm happy to be here with you all. As Jean-Pierre said, I'm going to spend some of my time really talking about how we can go from, having this information, having this report from the Reparations Council, and really using it as a tool and a weapon for our organizing for a really broad, multiracial, intergenerational movement that we believe is necessary to achieve reparations in New Jersey. So really quickly, just want to cover a few things that, I'm going to spend some time talking about. First, my goal is that we all walk away not only understanding what reparations is, how to define it, what the harms are that, call for reparations, but also understanding why now, 2026, is the perfect moment and is really a defining moment for truth and repair in New Jersey. And as Jean-Pierre said, it's really important. We have this symbol of Sankofa that we use and we reference. It's very important that we can look back and learn from past movements, successful movements for justice, and for transformative change to learn lessons, right, and ground ourselves and how we can also make change happen for our generations and hopefully within our lifetimes, right? And then finally, we'll dive into the how and what the Institute is doing, some of the strategies that we're using to build out this movement, but more importantly, how you can fit in and what are some of the action steps that you can take to join us in this work. Before we dive in, we do have this survey, and there's a QR code here on the screen. If you're able to scan it with your phone, I think it would be wonderful for you to fill it out. I'm also going to put the link in the chat. You give me 1 second for anybody who's not able to scan the QR code. And this is a reparations belief arc survey. We're borrowing this from our colleagues and our comrades in this struggle over at Liberation Ventures, who created this survey that's really meant to help us understand better how people are understanding reparations in this moment, what their level of support is for reparations. Do they believe that reparations are due? I think many of us on this call probably believe reparations are due, but some of us may not believe it's actually possible, something that can be turned into reality. Some of us may have varying opinions on what historical events actually deserve redress and repair, and some of us may have varying levels of action that we're willing to take, right? And so, especially when we talk about how much people support reparations or believe it's necessary, but don't believe that it's possible, we call that in our colleagues at Liberation Ventures and another group called Bliss Collective, they coined this term called the hope gap, right? And so I would ask that each of you takes just about a minute or so to fill out this survey. It's 10 simple questions, and we invite you to be honest. It's not a test. There's no trick questions in here, but this survey is going to really help us to better understand what type of organizing, education, and advocacy strategies will be the most effective for our movement. And if we have time at the end, I'm definitely happy to circle back and just share out what some of the trends are. So I just put the link in the chat for that. And we will share everything with Casey and team to distribute after the call.
And Assatta, there's a question from the chat. Is this survey shareable by other people? Is that okay to do?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I should say, just in transparency, I have the survey here now. It's a pre-survey, and I'm also going to ask you all to fill it out at the end as kind of a post-survey, because we want to, understand how our feelings and our viewpoints might change after this discussion. But you're definitely welcome to share that out. Okay, so first, I want to start by talking about this moment, and just really trying to ground ourselves in what is happening. I'm sure we would all agree that this is a very fraught moment, to say the least. I'm sure many of us on here, we wake up every single day, we read or listen to the news, and we feel angry, right? Maybe we feel sad and heartbroken, or even scared at what we're seeing, right? And so it's important that we're able to name and understand what is going on right now, and understand the fact that we're living in a moment of democratic backsliding, growing fascism, and also an effort at historical erasure of our truths and our history, right? Jean-Pierre mentioned that this is the 250th anniversary of the nation's founding, Declaration of Independence, and 250 years after people then were declaring independence from an unaccountable power. We're witnessing across the country kind of a return to those things, right? Something that's antithetical to the values that underpin the American independence movement, right? And so when we look across the country right now, we're seeing all types of terrible things. I don't have to tell you, there's mass federal agents running around the country, tearing communities apart, violating constitutional norms, right? We're seeing organized efforts to control what students can learn, right? And what communities are allowed to remember. Educators are being intimidated, book bans, curriculum restrictions. we're seeing libraries and exhibits, museums dismantled, right? There's criminalization and a crackdown on dissent, protests, and free speech itself. We're seeing, government institutions and departments and the resources and services that they provide to the most vulnerable communities being gutted. And really underpinning all of this, is this growing economic inequality, right? Every single day, there's an increase in the divide between the top 1% of people who control more wealth than the other 99%. And really all of this amounts to a deliberate attempt to narrow our collective memory, right? And really to shrink our democracy. And it's not accidental, it's not random. I'm sure all of us on this call know that this is an intentional backlash against recent gains in racial justice and equity, and it's a backlash against multiracial democracy. And so it's important that we start there because the reparations work that we're doing, it sits directly, squarely in the struggle, and it calls for us to resist these attacks, right? Not silently, but loudly resist these attacks on freedom and, frankly, human rights that we're witnessing right now. And that's on a national level. If we look more closely to the conditions here at home, what we find is that and you guys can let me know if you agree with this, but what we find is that New Jersey often is presenting itself as, this progressive blue state, a state that's enlightened and living in a post-racial society. But the reality is in New Jersey, we've never fully confronted our history, right? And as Jean-Pierre said, we collaborated with the Eagleton Institute out of Rutgers and to launch a poll that found that 56% of residents don't know that slavery happened here in New Jersey, right? That's a startling number. We're also living in one of the wealthiest and well-resourced states in the country, but there's this enduring legacy of slavery. The enduring legacy of slavery is visible when we look at all the stark disparities that exist for many New Jerseyans living here, especially Black New Jerseyans, right? We have disparities sharply divided along the lines of race and class in nearly every major aspect of life, whether it's health, education, incarceration, right? Environmental issues, school segregation, and wealth, right? We have in New Jersey this really astonishing $643,000 racial wealth gap that separates Black families from white families in New Jersey, right? And then that is the result of, and comes directly from, there's a through line directly from New Jersey's existing and enduring legacy as the slave state of the North, right? At the same time, we all just witnessed New Jersey elect a new governor, right? Mikey Sherrill. And so Mikey Sherrill was elected by an overwhelming majority of Black voters. In fact, 94% of Black voters voted for Mikey Sherrill. And so that shows us that, Black folk in the state remain a really decisive moral and political force. We also know that New Jersey's population is growing increasingly more diverse, right? We look at the 2020 census data, the most recent census data. It shows that New Jersey's child population is more diverse now than New Jersey's total overall population, and that future we can deduct from that future generations will continue to be diverse. That's in a state where the demographics of our legislators and other elected officials really don't reflect that reality, right? And so, I bring that up because I think it's an opening for us to think about cross-racial solidarity, right? We're also in a moment where communities are hungry for accountability and real transformation. I think we can see this evidence by some recent moments. These are just a few, but just recent moments like the striking down of the county ballot line, right? And the election of people like Senator Andy Kim. Some of these moments let us know that right now, our communities are questioning institutions, right, and seeking new models of accountability. And so, at the Institute, we are very ready for this moment. We believe that now is the perfect time to be organizing for reparations and transformative change. Really, and if not now, we always have to ask the question when, right? Because I think, as Jean-Pierre's story earlier about just the inability of our state elected officials to say the word reparations, right, and do a study, not even necessarily taking decisive action, but a study. We know that people will always, especially those in power, people will always be willing to kind of kick it down the road, right, and then sweep something under the rug. And so some people may categorize and frame reparations as something that is, unrealistic or maybe divisive, or something that should wait for a time that's less politically divisive for us right now, or to not challenge people and elected officials, people in power and elected officials who on other issues sometimes are our allies, right? But again, you're very committed to bold truth telling right now. And so if now is not the right moment, not really sure when is, right? And so we loudly scream that we need reparations now. At the same time, we have to be really clear-eyed and honest about the terrain that we're organizing on right now, right? And so there are challenges, and if we're serious about winning, if we're serious about organizing, we have to be honest about that. We have to have a clear-eyed assessment and not have wishful thinking. So there's definitely challenges, right? And so I want to name some of those challenges up front, but just talk about them a little bit. First, we're confronting a broken public memory, right? As we just said, many residents, in fact, the overwhelming majority, 56%, don't know that New Jersey was a slaveholding state. And they don't know about the state's role in the domestic slave trade, segregation, redlining, racial covenants, or in a whole host of things. And when our history is hidden and it makes harms feel accidental instead of structural, right? And so when harms feel accidental or random, repair may also feel like something that's unnecessary. And we have to be clear that this lack of awareness, this broken public memory, this ignorance, it's not random. It has been politically produced and manufactured, right? Through book bans, curriculum battles, and truly the sanitization of narratives. That has all made truth harder to access. And so we're organizing in a moment where truth itself is contested. That's a major challenge for us. Secondly, the hope gap, which I talked a little bit about already. Many of us will agree that something's wrong, things are wrong, injustice exists, right? But we may struggle to believe that meaningful change is possible. And that doesn't come out of nowhere, right? Our communities, especially Black communities, have seen promises be broken, right? They've watched promises and reforms stall, never really make it over the finish line, and have really experienced what they may describe as like incremental and small changes that still leave these larger systems and root causes of oppression intact, right? And so that really leads to this hope gap, a belief that the problem's real, but the solution is out of reach. And so our movement for reparations is not only fighting against injustice and some of these other challenges, but we're also fighting back against cynicism. I'm sure it's no surprise to all of you that we have very low civic engagement across the board, especially in New Jersey. Civic participation remains really uneven in how it's experienced. We have very low turnout elections, especially in some of our largest cities, which happen to be some of our most diverse communities. There's limited, if not, non-existent participation at public hearings, right? And a really minimal awareness of how local government works and operates. And so when people feel disconnected from decision-making, they're often likely to just disengage in the process altogether, right? And so we know that when people disengage and throw their hands up, that allows for power to be concentrated in the hands of just a few. Finally, and I'll talk about these last 2 points in tandem just to keep us on track with time, but we also have deep distrust in institutions, right? Whether it be government, media, or other large institutions. People just don't trust them, right? They believe that they're broken, especially for Black communities in particular, right? This distrust is historically grounded. It's rooted in centuries of broken promises, surveillance, over-policing, and disinvestment. And so, the distrust is understandable, but it creates this complexity where if people don't believe institutions are going to act in good faith, we ask the question, why even bother to engage with them at all, right? And so we have the work of acknowledging this skepticism, while also demonstrating to communities that when we are organized, we can actually achieve accountability and change. And similarly, we're in a time of heightened polarization, misinformation. There's campaigns being run across the country that are steeped in racialized fear, right? And reparations by our opponents is also it's often mischaracterized as being something that's divisive, unrealistic, and punitive for some, right? I named these challenges because we truly can't organize effectively if we're not honest about the reality that we're operating in, right? On the flip side, there are opportunities as well that we can seize, right? Every single challenge contains and opens the door up for possibilities. Some of the same conditions that are creating the instability of our moment right now are also creating these opportunities for transformation, right? So first, going back to some of our large institutions, when they're faltering and as we're seeing them lose legitimacy, we're also seeing people seeking elsewhere belonging, connection, and meaning, right? And so people right now are turning back to their faith communities and houses of worship. They're building their own mutual aid networks. They're joining and finding local organizations or grassroots coalitions. This is a great opportunity because it's going to create the fertile ground that we need, right? Because when people are losing faith in some of these other institutions, they can gain faith in each other. Next, again, we're in a moment where just norms and systems are crumbling, but that opens up the door to create something better, right? It opens up an opportunity to redefine what justice actually looks like, to expand public understanding, expand, the imagination when it comes to what we see and view as accountability, and really to reframe reparations as not just being about limited cash compensation, but about democratic renewal, reconstruction and redesigning systems so that harm can't ever be reproduced in the future. We have an opportunity to really tell the truth and leverage the truth, because when people understand that, not only did slavery happen here in New Jersey, its impacts were codified into law, right? And the disparities that we have right today they're not accidental. They don't amount to a lack of character for certain communities. They're the result of concentrated policy decisions. And so, when we tell the truth, we have the opportunity to help people start to connect the dots, right? Reduce some of the confusion and the opportunities for manipulation. We really open up the door for solidarity to be built, right? And finally, we have this huge opportunity, especially in a year like 2026, the 250th anniversary, to redefine, shift, reclaim narratives and tell our own stories, right? Because we know that before we can ever even shift the policy conversation, we really have to shift the culture of our communities, right? And when we do that, we can take reparations from being something that's seen as radical to something that's reasonable, right? Maybe from being fringe to long overdue. And when that happens, we know that political leaders, folks especially who want to be elected, they're likely to follow, right? And so the lesson there is that when we can change what people believe is possible, we can also change what policymakers and people who want to stay in power believe is viable, right? Okay. And so, as I mentioned, I do want to just take a moment to look back on some of the successful movements of the past and that have come before us, right? Reparations is definitely something that we view as being focused on the future, right? It's all about the future, but we also know that history is our teacher, right? And so that's why we have the Sankofa symbol here, as we were mentioning before. We have to know where we've come from to know where we're going. And looking at some of these, I think movements that many of us are familiar with, of course, like the civil rights movement, women's suffrage, the labor movement, just to name a few. We know that even though they're successful and we've gained many things from them, they too were once dismissed as being radical, right? Those communities and the organizers behind those movements were told to wait, right? They were told that what they were demanding was unrealistic and that it was too disruptive, right? And they also existed and organized and in moments very much like the one that we are seeing today, right? Where backlash, political repression, criminalization, and erasure were all things that they faced. But they won too under similar conditions. And so it's really important that we take a moment just to look back. And so, I'll start by just talking about the civil rights movement. Again, I think this is one that many of us, if not all of us on here, are going to be familiar with, right? We know that when we think about the civil rights movement, it was led by figures like obviously Martin Luther King Jr., but it was powered by countless grassroots organizers, especially Black women, young people, faith leaders, clergy, and local community leaders, right? We don't have enough time to name all of the many important figures in the movement, but we do know that the civil rights movement was able to successfully dismantle the legal architecture and the structures that upheld Jim Crow segregation and some of the inequalities and inequities that were present. And again, these organizers, they were not operating in a rosy, flowery, easy terrain. They faced things like state-sanctioned racial terror, right? Lynching and police violence was commonplace. They were up against, racialized violence to prevent folks from voting, right? Things like literacy tests and other roadblocks to the ballot. Mass incarceration, economic retaliation, the media really distorting and working hand in hand with these bad actors to distort and tell stories that upheld the Jim Crow segregation, right? But in the face of that, they did persist and they won battles in the streets, in courtrooms, and in legislatures, right? And when we think back on some of the achievements, the big ones that stand out, of course, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, right? Outlawing segregation in public spaces and employment. We have the 1965 Voting Rights Act, which prohibited racial discrimination in voting, right? And obviously since has been gutted, but was one of the most successful pieces of legislation to come out of this moment, right? And they did not achieve these things. Don't let anybody tell you that it was easier then to organize or that these weren't hard fought battles. They were, but the organizers of the civil rights movement, they won by using time-tested best practices for organizing, right? Like mass direct action, taking, using their bodies and using the economic leverage their spending power, right, to stop business as usual, right? We think about things like the Selma and Bloody Sunday marches, or the Montgomery bus boycott. They were also using, namely the NAACP, right, using strategic litigation to fight some of these battles in the courts. They understood that they also had to win hearts and not just minds, right? So they used moral framing that really was focused on exposing this contradiction that existed between American democracy as it was being sold and told versus the actual racial apartheid that existed on the ground in the country, right? And most importantly, they were creating spaces in their communities and for grassroots organizing at the most local levels and sustaining it and scaling it and growing it over time, right? And so, we know that the movement didn't just secure legal reforms, it actually redefined who democracy was for, right? It expanded citizenship and really laid the groundwork for some of the subsequent racial justice movements to come. certainly the reparations work that we're doing now, but Black Lives Matter, right? Say Her Name, and all other types of movements that we've seen since then. And so, I think this is a moment in our history where we definitely need to look back, right, and understand that we've been here before, right? Our people have been here before, and we were able to find a way. We were able to pretty much across all different social justice movements. Again, I have a couple slides on some images of the women's suffrage movement and the labor movement, but we don't have time. But the overarching lesson is that across all of these movements, these people were told that they should wait, right? They were labeled extreme and they faced backlash and repression, very similar to how actors in our movement are being relegated in this moment. And yet they won, right? They succeeded in part because they focused on building organized people power from the ground up. They focused on shifting public narratives and telling their own stories and telling the truth. They were able to connect their policy demands to morals and values, right? And at the end of the day, they refuse to water down or really dilute their demands. And so we know that the work that we're doing for reparations, it stands in this lineage, right? And so we have to draw lessons. Not everything will fit this current moment. Things definitely need to be adapted for now, but there's definitely a lot for us to look back on and learn, okay? Next, in the last few minutes, I want to talk about what it looks like and what work we're doing here at the Institute and with our partners to really build out this movement for truth, repair, and long-lasting justice. As I said before, we know that achieving this is not going to be something that is just done by people in academic institutions, for example, or just lawyers or kind of policy professionals. This is going to require everyone from every sector of our communities, whether it's young people, seniors, elders, people, black people and non-black people alike, citizens, non-citizens alike. We really are going to require this multiracial, intergenerational movement that's led by Black communities and grounded in grassroots power to get there. And so I want to share some of our strategies for building out that movement. First, we really have to focus on public education and shifting the narrative. I think JP would agree, but that 56% number really haunts us and keeps us up at night. And so our work primarily has to start with engaging folks in public education, right? We have to be able to uncover and expose some of the hidden histories of slavery, but also post-slavery racial violence and harms that happen in New Jersey. And while doing that, we have to normalize reparations as something that's logical, it's necessary, and frankly, it's overdue, right? We have to shift reparations from something that's seen as controversial and fringe to something that's seen as inevitable. Not a matter of how, but just a matter of, or if, but just a matter of when, right? And doing this work also is going to require us to equip our communities, empower them with the tools, the resources, the knowledge, the skills that they need to tell their own stories, right? We're not only trying to shift policy, but imagination, because when people can imagine the type of repair and envision, a better tomorrow, then they'll be able to also to start to demand it. Second, we're very, very focused on community organizing and really base building, right? In our organizing, we're working to center the communities who have been most impacted by the legacy of slavery, right? But for our allies, we're also inviting you into this fight and, to organize alongside Black communities, because we know that when we have this larger informed base that's ready to act, whether it's because they are attending some of the program we're going to put on, like hosting teach-ins, trainings, whatever it may be, that they're going to have the power needed to act, right? We're also investing in aligning movements, right? We're doing coalition and movement building by uniting faith leaders, educators, artists, organizers from all different movements, so that we can build shared demands and coordinate our action. We're planning to engage in things like direct actions, right, and mass mobilization. We know that we have to keep the pressure on and create urgency. So we'll be doing that through things like rallies, protests, days of action, and most importantly, mobilizing people to go to their town councils or state legislature meetings to speak up and to testify. And then finally, of course, the policy advocacy work, right? We know that repair really, it can't be symbolic, it can't be rhetorical, right? We have to have, number one, concrete commitments from public officials, but then we also need to see them do the work of introducing and passing legislation and then ultimately implementing it, right, and being accountable. And our work, all of this work is really guided by a few core values for us. I know we don't have much time to dive into them and just break these down, but really quickly for us, we're centering building power, growing grassroots leadership, being accountable to Black communities. We want to stay flexible and innovative. We're always focused on the future, the tomorrow, right? And being bold truth tellers. And the way that we, are going to be able to build out that movement and accomplish all of those things is really on focusing on building out the infrastructure, right? We know that, movements are not successful and they don't win unless they have infrastructure that can outlast a single moment, right? And so some of the infrastructure that we're building out, we're not talking about buildings or bridges, budgets necessarily. We're talking about relationships, right? Leadership development, having shared language and coordinated strategy. And we have started to do some of this work. Some of you probably have participated or attended an event or an action that we put on in the last year. This is just to highlight a few, but we've already started to host coalition meetings and convenings and strategy sessions. We're taking the reparations report off the shelf and really bringing it on the statewide tour into communities, right? There have been marches and rallies before in the past in support of reparations. We're doing teach-ins and hosting public conversations. We're training leaders so that this movement is not just concentrated in the hands of a few folks. We want to build scalable leadership. And so we do have a few things coming up next. I'm just realizing how small these images actually look, but these are flyers. We can share them out after the fact of some of the upcoming efforts that we're putting on. So we're hosting town halls across the state where we're really doing this public education work and trying to identify folks to join local organizing teams and pods. We're hosting community dialogues, which are these small group discussions really meant to, traverse difference, bring people together over the things that they have in common, but to uncover some of the local histories and experiences that may exist. We have other things happening. We don't have a RSVP or save the date yet, but we are planning on hosting a symposium, a conference of sorts on Juneteenth. So save the date. Please plan to join us if you're available. I think it's going to be on Juneteenth proper. And then finally, just quickly, some of what you can do yourself to take up action. Hopefully you're committed now after hearing all this and really wondering what you can do. Of course, you should RSVP and join us at some of those events, but there's things that you yourself and your community have the power to organize yourself. And I just quickly threw in this quote from Fannie Lou Hamer that says, "When I liberate myself, I liberate others. If you don't speak out, ain't nobody gonna speak out for you," right? And this just speaks to the type of radical solidarity that we need to be practicing right now, right? We can't expect people to stick their necks out for us if we want to do it for them. And so, some of the things you can do, of course, is to educate yourself further on reparations, but also to bring these conversations and this work of public education into your community. You can share the report, but there's fun things to do as well. Hosting a book club, a film screening. You can research your own neighbor's racial history and find out what was the community's history with segregation or redlining and racial covenants. you can join us in the work of, really raising consciousness and shifting the narrative, maybe by writing an op-ed or a letter to the editor, right? And bringing this conversation to the public demand. Art, and creative placemaking plays such an important role in making change as well. We've seen that in every single movement. And so we're also encouraging people to create art for the movement, right? Of course, you can organize, and organizing can really be as simple as having a one-on-one, very intentional conversation with your own family, friends, or neighbors. You can scale that up by hosting a neighborhood or community meeting, or joining an existing network, right, that is already mobilizing and organizing for reparations. Finally, you can advocate, and excuse my typo here, but we definitely encourage you to actually reach out to your elected officials and ask them to publicly support reparations, publicly support reparative policies. We have about 100 of them in our report that we're recommending, right, and calling on legislators to take up. When the time comes, you can testify, and you should testify at your council or other public meetings to have your voice on the record. And there are other things you can do as well. And so, I'll leave it there. Just wanted to leave you with this closing quote from Harry Belafonte. He shared this in 2010, and it says, although slavery may have been abolished, the crippling poison of racism still persists, and the struggle still continues, right? And so, we know that in this moment, again, many people are trying to talk about reparations as this fringe thing or as this elusive moment, but for us, it's a movement, right? And we don't see reparations as charity or a handout. It's really about justice. We're not seeking symbolism, but true structural transformation. Really the question is not about whether harm occurred or repair is deserved, but the question really should be on whether we will and can organize power that's strong enough to win repair, right? And so, we invite you to not sit on the sidelines of this movement, but to really join us in the struggle. And yes, I thank you all for your time. I'm sorry I went a little long, but I really appreciate you, and I'll stop speaking and let Casey open it up for questions.
Thank you so much, Assatta and Jean-Pierre. Folks, light up with the emojis and reactions if this landed for you. Drop it in the chat. Just huge thanks to both Assatta and to Jean-Pierre for sharing in a very condensed format all of the incredible information and the research that has been done over a 2-year period in developing this report in the first place, for trying to bring to light that erased history of our own state and our own knowledge, and for the work that you and the Institute and your partners are doing in trying to now bring this report, as you said, into action, into our daily lives. What strikes me is all of the ways in which people can get involved in ways that work for them along this process, right? I love the fact that you can create art for this movement. You can participate in conversations. Some things that folks don't know, but you can know, is that you can actually train as a facilitator to hold these conversations in your own communities, in the locations where Jean-Pierre and Assatta and the Institute are going for these town halls and these community dialogues. And so that's all information that we will share out after the fact. Gathering Ground is thrilled to be a part of a group of people across the state that are trying to also help with this public education aspect, right, of bringing this conversation here today for all of you and for the recording that will go out publicly. It just, there's a lot of opportunity to be able to engage, to be able to learn more, to educate ourselves on this process too. So again, huge thank you to all of you. We have about 10 minutes left in our time here today. So I want to open the floor to participants if there's questions for Assatta and Jean-Pierre. And what we'll ask you to do is either use the raise hand function so that we'll call on you to come off mute to ask your question, or to drop a question in the chat. Even if we can't get to a question today, we'll hang on to these questions. We'll share that back with Assatta and Jean-Pierre, and see if there's resources that you can be directed to, et cetera. Eric, I see your hand up. Please go ahead.
Is there a document that can be shared that creates talking points for city residents to propose resolutions for their city councils regarding reparations.
Yeah, hi Eric. Yes, we do have a cover letter, and we did have a resolution that we prior to the launch of the council that we shared, that we have and yeah, we can share something like that urges your city council, and we have close to 18 city councils and 2 county councils that have supported resolutions in support of reparations task force. So yes, we do have model legislation and a cover letter to accompany that as well.
With that document, and I appreciate that response, is it possible to list the cities that have already approved it so they don't get hit up again?
Yeah, we on our website, if you go to njisj.org/say the word, the list of cities and all the locations are there. They're all listed there if you want to take a look.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Thanks, Eric. Who else has a question? There's a lot of love in the chat. I'll say that much for everything that you've shared. And as a reminder, if you would prefer to ask your question off the recording, we can also stop the recording for that to allow for those questions. So if that's the case, direct message me briefly and I will pay attention to that. But does anyone else have another question? Anaya, go ahead.
I don't want to jump in front of anyone if folks do have a question, so I'll take like 3 seconds if anyone else wants to jump in. Okay. I'm curious, what was the most difficult part of this process that you maybe didn't expect? I know, we know that rebuttals and such are going to happen, but what was something that shocked y'all about the process?
Well, I'll let Assatta go first. I think that's a good question. I think what I had to think about it. Because I think it's a good question.
Yeah, I mean, I was hoping you would go first too, JP, because I'm not sure what has been shocking. I think we were shocked to learn that 56% of New Jerseyans don't know about slavery. Somewhat. I mean, it also makes sense though when we think about just how public education is structured here. I don't know. I'll think about it.
Yeah, in terms of shocking, I guess I don't know if I'm not someone who is easily shocked, but I guess I will say, yeah, I guess but even when presented with the facts and prior examples of work being done, people are still don't believe it's possible. Even folks who support the work, and just the amount of folks who just don't think it's possible in our lifetime, who are very sort of skeptical. And so like even after doing a presentation like this, or folks who are on board, how skeptical folks are of the actual possibility of it happening.
And I might take that another direction while folks are still formulating questions. Is there anything that shocked you in a good way?
I would say, oh yeah, Assatta, please.
I would just say that personally, I found it really inspiring. I think to work with some of the young people that like we've been organizing with, and just see how really committed they are to this idea of reparations as well. I think oftentimes like young people are left out of the conversation, right? We see this movement, it's been going on for so long, so it's often led by our elders, right? And then people coming up. But especially we work with this one young man named Nathan. I'm not going to give all his information, but his first name's Nathan. And I'll share it in the chat. Actually, he wrote this wonderful op-ed about the role of young people in this movement, and just how there is no future, right? And so there is no movement for reparations that doesn't meaningfully include young people. And then so, across the state, we've been having these conversations, doing these trainings. We do youth organizing, and young people are really drawn to this idea. They think it's an issue for them as well, right?
Right. Thanks, Assatta.
Yeah, and I would just say pleasantly, I've seen folks start book clubs and have shown tremendous interest in the report. I think that's been a pleasant surprise to see, and people follow up and actually engage and actually follow through. So that's been really great.
Wonderful. We're down to kind of our last 3 minutes. Any other burning questions for folks? Stephanie, I wasn't sure if that was a hand raised or not. I'm not going to put you on the spot. Yes, you've got a question? Go for it.
Yeah, it's not really a question. I'm just glad I did put this in the chat. I'm just glad that we're having a conversation. And as an urban planner, this is something that burns in my heart deeply, that we're speaking about this now from a zoning and planning perspective, even so, because from the governmental perspective, how those harms have really made an impact for our particular community as far as wealth and also ownership. So I think it's really great that we're having this conversation, that we are going back to the fundamental practice of why we are at this point. So I think this is excellent.
Thanks so much, Stephanie. Yeah, go ahead, Jean-Pierre.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. Yes, and in the report, we go in deep into the zoning practices used in the state of New Jersey to reinforce and create segregation, and we do have some recommendations to try to address that, to repair those harms.
Great. So we're coming up on the last couple of minutes before we close. I've just dropped into the chat contact information for Jean-Pierre and Assatta. You will, of course, also get that as part of the contact sheet after this recording is done and after the session is over. That'll come out in the next couple of days with the resources from Jean-Pierre and Assatta and the Institute. For those of you who indicated you were comfortable having your information shared, your email will appear on that contact sheet. For those of you who elected not to, your name and your organization and your title will appear, but not your email, just as a reminder to folks. And it'll just be the folks that actually attended today. But we are excited to be able to continue talking about this. I don't know, for folks who remember, the reading group that Gathering Ground holds is actually working its way through the Reparations Now report currently. So we've read the first couple of sections. Our next meeting is on April 9th, I think, and we're going to be making our way through the second section of that report. So if folks want a place to be able to unpack more and read more and talk more, please get in touch here or get in touch and involved with the other Institute groups and other folks that are in your community doing this work too. Thank you, Anaya. Anaya just dropped in our contact information for staying connected to Gathering Ground specifically, but we hope that you will stay connected to Assatta and Jean-Pierre and the work that the Institute is doing. And together we can start to spread the word and start to make a difference here. Maria Carnamola, any last words before we close out for the day?
There's so much. My brain is just kind of thinking about everything that Jean-Pierre and Assatta shared. And of course, we are committed to helping the Institute in this work. And so this is, one way that we thought we could help amplify the work that they are doing and get the word out on the reparations report. So I want to thank both you, Jean-Pierre and Assatta, not only for sharing insights, but providing directions for all of us on how to move forward and how to assist you in this work. So we're excited to be here, and we definitely will look for ways to partner again with you to help any way we can. So stay connected to us, stay connected to the Institute. I want to thank you all for being here today, sticking around. Lots of important information that was shared. I just want to remind folks that, and I don't know if this is what you meant, Jean-Pierre, when you were talking about people don't think it's possible, if it's, just in terms of like financially, like people just don't want to make that commitment, that financial commitment to reparations. but we certainly commit a lot of dollars to tons of things that should not be in either the state budget or congressional budget. So I think last time I checked, it was like $200 billion in corporate welfare that usually end up in the pockets of the wealthiest. So reparations is indeed possible. We just have to continue to imagine it and talk about it and make it part of, normalize it in all our conversations, because it is overdue for sure, like Assatta said. So thank you all for being here. Stay connected, and we wish you a wonderful rest of the day.
Bye, everybody. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Recording stopped.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. It was great.